The law said every human man could be assigned an orc wife. Edrin never thought that nightmare would reach his door. Then he found a small orc girl face down in the snow with a broken shackle on her ankle, blood on her mouth, and hunters closing in behind her. She was still dangerous. The moment he touched her, she woke up with a knife in her hand and tried to cut his throat. He barely caught her wrist. She was weak, freezing, half-poisoned, and shaking so hard she could hardly breathe. But her eyes were full of fury, not fear. Not the eyes of a servant, not the eyes of someone ordinary. Whoever she was, people had not just chased her. They had wanted her erased. The dogs were getting closer. Edrin should have run. A poor human woodcutter did not survive by dragging trouble home. But when he saw iron bruised into her skin and heard her whisper, "Don't let them take me back," he made the worst choice of his life. He lifted her into his arms and carried her toward his cabin. Behind them, something howled. Edrin kicked. His cabin door shut with his heel and dropped the wooden bar into place, just as the barking grew louder outside. His whole house was one room and barely standing. Smoke stains darkened the low ceiling. Cold wind slipped through cracks in the walls. The table leaned to one side. The bed was nothing more than rough boards, straw, and patched blankets. In one corner sat a stack of chopped wood he had spent the week cutting. In another sat his tools, carefully arranged, because tools lasted longer than people did if you treated them right. He laid the orc woman on his bed, and suddenly the room looked even smaller, even wounded. She did not belong in a place like this. Her boots were made from thick black leather, stitched with patterns too fine for a common fighter. A broken clasp hung from her shoulder wrap, not iron, but silver. Her hands were scarred, but not like a labourer's. They looked trained, measured, dangerous. When he tried to untie the cloth around her side, her hand shot up again. "Touch me again," she said through clenched teeth, "and lose the hand." Her voice was hoarse, but there was command in it. Edrin stared at her for a second, breathing hard from the run. "Then bleed to death proud," he muttered, and reached for the kettle. That seemed to catch her off guard. He moved quickly, not gently, but carefully. He boiled water, tore an old linen shirt into strips and cleaned the cut along her ribs while she trembled with fever and rage. There was a dark bruise around her ankle where the broken shackle had been. Poison too, he thought, not enough to kill fast, but enough to weaken. Whoever hunted her had wanted her alive first. She watched every move like she was memorizing him for later. Edrin was used to silence, used to eating alone, working alone, waking alone. No one came to his cabin, unless they needed something cheap. But now a wounded orc woman lay in his bed with a knife under her hand and danger at his door, and his lonely little life no longer felt small. It felt exposed. Then, while he was wringing blood from the cloth, a firelight caught something hanging at her throat. A carved tusk medallion, split at the edge, and even Edrin, a man who knew little of orc nobility, knew that mark was not worn by someone ordinary. A second later, boots crunched outside his cabin wall. Edrin froze. The boots stopped just outside the wall, close enough for him to hear leather creak and snow shift under weight. The orc woman heard it too. In an instant, all fever and weakness vanished from her face. Her eyes sharpened. Her fingers closed around the knife. Edrin blew out the lamp. The cabin dropped into darkness, except for the low red glow of the fire. Neither of them moved. A shadow passed across the shutter. Then another. Someone tested the door once. Not hard, just enough to see if it was barred. Edrin felt the axe handle in his palm growing slick with sweat. The orc woman had pushed herself halfway up despite the pain, one hand pressed to her side, the other ready to strike if the door opened, but after a long, crushing silence, the footsteps moved on. They stayed still until even the dogs were gone. Only then did Edrin relight the lamp. The small flame showed her face drawn tight with pain. Again, She had spent what little strength she had left preparing to kill. "You should lie back," he said. "You should have let me finish dying outside," she answered. But this time the words did not sound like a threat. They sounded tired. Edrin went back to work. He cleaned the wound more carefully, ground bitterroot into a paste, and tied fresh cloth around her ribs. When he reached her ankle, she flinched hard. "The shackle did that?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. It was not a gift. That was all she gave him. He made thin broth from the last of his root vegetables and a bone he had been saving. It was plain, almost embarrassing to offer, but she drank it all. He noticed the way she held the bowl, steady, disciplined, even while shivering. Not like a frightened fugitive, more like someone refusing to let weakness be seen. When she finished, she glanced at the empty pot hanging over the fire. "You gave me your share. I can eat in the morning." That was not an answer. Edrin shrugged and looked away. "I've gone hungry before." Something in her expression changed then. Not warmth exactly, not yet. But the hard edge of contempt eased by a breath as the night deepened. The cabin settled into a strange routine. He fed the fire. She stayed awake longer than she should have, watching every corner of the room as if she did not trust walls to protect anyone. He sat on a stool near the door, sharpening his knife, pretending not to notice that she refused to sleep until she was sure he would not touch the medallion at her throat. At one point, she looked at the wooden charms hanging above his window, small carved pieces tied with twine. "What are those?" "River ash," he said. "My mother used to hang them in winter, keeps bad luck out." The corner of her mouth moved, almost mocking. "Humans use wood scraps against bad luck?" Edrin glanced at her. "What do orcs use?" Her eyes shifted. "To the fire, blood, oaths, iron." He let out a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "Wood is easier." For the first time, she actually looked at him, not as a burden or a threat, but as a man. Later, near dawn, he saw her hand trembling as she tried to lift the water cup. She hated that he noticed. Instead of reaching for her, he moved the stool closer and set the cup within easier reach, making it seem like nothing. No pity, no comment. She stared at the cup for a moment, then said quietly, "You are careful." Edrin added another piece of wood to the fire. "I work with broken things. Careless hands make them worse." The room went still after that. Outside, wind pushed against the cabin and snow whispered over the roof. Inside, the fire burned low, and for the first time since he had carried her in, the orc woman let her eyes close without her hand on the knife. Edrin noticed, and just before sleep took her, she whispered one word he had not expected to hear from her at all: "Thank you." But when morning came, he woke to an open door, fresh cold air pouring in, and blood drops leading out into the snow. Edrin cursed under his breath and rushed outside without even pulling on his gloves. The snow was still, falling, light but steady, and the blood drops were easy to follow. They led past the woodpile, past the frozen bucket, and down toward the narrow river behind the cabin. He found her there on one knee at the bank, one hand braced against a stone, the other gripping the broken chain at her ankle. She had made it only that far before her strength gave out. She turned at once when she heard him. For a second, shame flashed across her face, harder than pain. "I was not running," she said. "You can barely stand." "I noticed." He looked down and saw what she had been trying to do. The snow around her was marked where she had scrubbed at the dark blood on her side and at the dried stains on her clothing. Near her knee lay the medallion, briefly exposed where it had slipped free from her collar. "You were washing the blood off before someone tracked you," he said. She did not answer, which was answer enough. Edrin stepped closer and held out his hand. She stared at it like it offended her. Orc pride, he was beginning to understand, could survive fever, poison, and hunger far longer than the body could. "You can fall here," he said, "or be angry inside where it's warm." For one long moment he thought she would refuse just to prove she could. Then, slowly, she put her hand in his. Even weakened, she was heavy and solid, all coiled strength and stubborn dignity. He half carried her back to the cabin, and though she said nothing, she did not pull away. By midday, the fever had returned. He gave her bitter root and willow bark, changed the bandage again, and forced her to drink more broth. She accepted the care with less resistance now, but not with ease. Every small act still cost her something. Trust, he realized, was not one choice. It was 100 humiliations survived without betrayal. The storm trapped them together. Another day, then another. Their silence changed shape. It was no longer the silence of strangers waiting for danger. It became the silence of two tired people learning where the other one hurt. She watched him when he thought she was sleeping and saw the stiffness in his injured hand worsen each evening. He caught her once, pressing her thumb hard into the center of an old scar across her shoulder, as if pain kept some memory in place. That night, while the wind scraped branches over the roof, she spoke first. My brother used to say weakness should be hidden before enemies smell it. Edrin looked up from repairing a torn bucket strap. Did he die? Her face did not move, but her voice changed. He was murdered. The room went quiet except for the crackle of the fire. She did not give details. She did not need to. Grief sat plainly enough in the way she looked into the flames and nowhere else. For the first time, Edrin understood that what followed her was not only danger, it was loss. Someone had cut her life open long before he found her in the snow. After a while, she looked at his hand. And yours? He flexed the stiff fingers once. Quarry crush. Years ago. You kept working. I didn't have a better option. That earned the smallest nod from her. Not pity, recognition. Later, he showed her how he tied wax thread around cracked tool handles so they lasted through winter. She watched with surprising focus, then asked to try. Her big hands were clumsy with such fine work at first, and when the thread slipped, she swore softly in her own tongue. Edrin laughed before he could stop himself. Her head snapped toward him. He thought he had made a mistake. Then, to his shock, the corner of her mouth lifted. It changed her whole face. For one brief moment, she looked younger, less like a hunted commander and more like a woman who had not been allowed to rest in years. That moment stayed with him longer than it should have. But outside, the world was tightening. The next afternoon, Tobren from the village came by under the excuse of wanting his axe repaired. Tobren was the kind of man who smiled only when he smelled weakness. He stood too long at the door, peering past Edrin's shoulder into the cabin. Heard dogs in the woods last night, Tobren said. Heard riders, too. Edrin kept his face flat. Then hear them somewhere else. Tobren's eyes dropped. To the floor, where one large footprint had not fully dried near the hearth. He looked back up slowly. You got company? Edrin did not answer. Tobren smiled then, thin and ugly. Careful, woodcutter. These days, hiding the wrong thing can get a man buried shallow. He left, but not before glancing once toward the window. Inside, the orc woman had already risen despite the pain. Knife in hand, breathing hard. He knows, she said. Maybe. No, she said, moving to the shutter and peering through the crack. He suspects. That is worse. Edrin stepped beside her, far off between the trees, half hidden in the falling snow. Dark shapes were moving again. Not one rider this time. 5, and at the front of them was a tall figure carrying a banner marked with the same tusk crest hanging at her throat. The riders did not rush the cabin. That was what made them worse. They came through the snow in a slow, certain line, as if they already owned the ground beneath Edrin's feet. The banner at the front snapped. Once in the wind, and the tusk crest on it matched the broken medallion at the woman's throat exactly. She went still beside the shutter. Not afraid. Not surprised, just finished hiding, Edrin looked at her. Who are they? Her grip tightened on the knife. My people. That answer landed harder than it should have. Outside, a deep voice called out in the orc tongue. He did not understand the words, but he understood command, demand, the kind that expected walls to open. She closed her eyes once, then straightened despite the pain in her side. When she turned back to him, something in her face had changed. The exhaustion was still there, the fever too, but now it sat beneath something older and colder. Authority. The same woman who had shivered in his bed now looked like she had once stood above battlefields and watched men lower their eyes. "My name is not Saka," she said. Edrin said nothing. She took the medallion from beneath her collar and let him see it fully in the firelight. Carved bone, silver inlay, red markings. Along the edge, no common symbol, no common life. "I am Thera," she said, "daughter of High Matron Veska of the Red Tusk Line, commander of the Eastern Border Host." The words seemed to strip the air from the room. Edrin stared at her as if he had never seen her before. In a way, he had not. Not a fugitive. Not a nameless wounded fighter. A high-born orc war leader. A woman whose name could move clans, and she had slept under his roof, eaten from his pot, let him bandage her like she was only another broken soul the winter had thrown at his door. "You lied," he said at last, her jaw hardened. "I hid what? Would have put a blade in my throat faster. That was my choice to make." A beat passed. Pain flickered across her face, but he could not tell whether it came from the wound or his words. Outside, the voice called again, sharper now. Thera drew a breath. "They are not here to rescue me." That made him look at her again. She spoke quickly then because now she had to. She had been taken during a political escort, she said. A joining was being arranged under the new law between humans and orcs, not for love, not even for peace, but for power. She was meant to stand as the first great symbol of the treaty. Instead, someone in her own ranks betrayed her. Poison in her drink, shackles at her ankle, her escorts slaughtered. Her death meant to be blamed on humans, so war could begin again, with her blood as proof. "And the law," Edrin said slowly, the dread finally taking shape. "The law that says humans must take an orc wife." She met his eyes. "I was meant to be assigned to one of your village leaders, a public bond, a staged vow, a leash, dressed as peace." The room turned smaller than ever, not because of the riders, because now he understood just how far above. Him, she stood. He thought of his cracked table, his patched blankets, the broth she had eaten because she had no choice. He thought of her watching him with those unreadable eyes, while knowing all along that she came from a world where men like him were not even considered worth speaking to unless they carried wood or obeyed orders. And yet she had let him believe. They were simply two strangers against the cold. "You should have told me before I carried your secrets for you," he said, quieter now. "Before I mistook your need for trust." That hit. For the first time since he had known her, Thera looked shaken. But there was no time to let the wound settle. The cabin door shook under a heavy fist. Then another voice came from outside, this one in broken human speech. "By order of Red Tusk blood and border law, open this door. Deliver Lady Thera. Deliver the human who concealed her." Edrin's blood went cold. Thera stepped forward at once, putting herself between him and the door, despite her injury. "Stay behind me," she said. He almost laughed at the madness of it. "They want me too." "Yes," she said. And now her voice was iron. "Because if they cannot kill me quietly, they may still kill the man who kept me alive." Then the bar on the door cracked, and Edrin realized the war had reached his house before either of them was ready. The door split inward with a crack of old wood, but Thera moved first. She kicked the broken table sideways into the opening, buying only a second, maybe two. It was enough. Edrin grabbed the iron poker from the hearth and drove it through the hand of the first man reaching in. A roar followed. Snow and torchlight spilled into the cabin. Someone outside shouted in the orc tongue. Another voice barked for Thera to stand down in the matron's name. Thera's answer came like a blade. "I stand in my own name." That froze them. Even wounded, even pale with fever, she stepped into the center of the room like it was a war. All, and not a poor woodcutter's cabin with smoke in the beams. Her knife was low in one hand. Her medallion hung visible now. Bloodline, command, claim. The men outside hesitated. Then one of them made the mistake of speaking too boldly. The matron commands your return. The human is nothing. Give him to us. Thera did not even look back. When she answered, he is under my protection. Edrin felt those words hit him harder than the breaking door had. Protection. From her, it sounded like law. But it also sounded like distance. Like he had become a burden she would carry because honor demanded it. The thought burned. The men outside pressed again. One torch flew through the doorway and rolled across the floor. Fire licked up the leg of the stool. Edrin stamped it out and turned just in time to see Thera sway on her feet. She was losing strength. He caught her arm. You can't hold them. No, she said, breathing hard, but I can stop them from taking you. Then she did the last thing he expected. She turned to him fully, with chaos at the door and death one breath away, and lowered herself to, one knee. Edrin stared at her. Outside, even the riders went silent. Among humans, the gesture might have meant pleading. Among orcs, he understood at once from the shock on every face that it meant something far greater. Edrin, she said, and there was no command in her voice now, only truth. Hear me before they break this house apart. His grip tightened. On the poker. In my clan, she said, a high-born female does not kneel unless offering bond, protection and name by her own will, not by treaty, not by order, not by politics. Her eyes held his with a force stronger than anything in the room. I was meant to be traded, displayed, used. But you did not ask what I could give you. You took me in when I was hunted, fed me when you had little, and touched my wounds with more honor than most of my own blood. He could not breathe. I offer you this before witness, she said. Come with me. Stand under my protection. If you must, stand beside me if you can. I will give you land, a place in my stronghold, my clan's shield, and my word that no one will ever make you small again. If you choose it, I will take no other bond. I will name you before them all. The room felt suddenly too narrow for the choice inside it. Everything in Edrin wanted to believe her. That was the worst part, because wanting it was dangerous. He looked at her armor, her medallion, the banner beyond the broken door. Then at his own rough hands, scarred, empty, blackened by labor and smoke. He thought of the village that barely wanted him. He thought of her world, where every stare would measure him and find him lacking. He thought of waking one day in her halls and seeing pity where he had once imagined respect. You make it sound simple, he said, voice rough. Her expression broke, just slightly. It will not be simple. I'm a poor man in a broken cabin, and I am a hunted woman with enemies in my blood. That is not the same. No, she said, it is not, but loneliness is. That silenced him. Outside, one of the riders shouted for the attack to resume. A spear slammed into the doorframe. The wall shook. Edrin looked at Thera, still kneeling in ash and firelight, offering him not a dream, but a difficult future with her hand open in front of everyone who could use it against her. No pride, no disguise, no distance. Just choice. And for the first time in his life, the thing standing before him was not survival. It was belonging, and it terrified him more. He bent, pulled her up before the next blow hit the door, and said the only honest thing he had. If I step into your world, I may lose everything. Thera's hand closed around his wrist. Then lose it with me. And when the door burst wide for the second time, Edrin stepped to her side instead of behind her. What followed cost them both more than either had spoken aloud that night. The riders did not take Thera back in chains. They left with blood. On the snow, 2 dead, 1 wounded, and a truth they could no longer bury. Before dawn, Thera named the traitor openly, one of her own mother's counselors, a male war chief who had arranged the poison, the false escort, and the planned murder that would have thrown blame on the human border villages. Edrin, who had seen the shackle, the poison, and the fear in her before she ever spoke her name, became the witness her enemies had not expected to survive. The scandal split the Red Tusk clan. Some called her reckless for choosing a human over an easier political bond. Some called Edrin an insult to her bloodline. The village did not welcome him back either. Tobrin spread his version of the story, until even old neighbors looked at Edrin as though he had crossed into something unnatural and would never fully return. So in the end, both of them lost the worlds that had once defined them, but they did not lose each other. Thera refused the staged marriage the treaty had planned for her, and rewrote the bargain in front of clan and border witnesses alike. No. Human man would be forced to take an orc wife. No orc woman would be traded as a symbol. If there would be peace, it would have to be built by choice, not command. It nearly cost Thera her place in succession. It cost Edrin the last easy path back into his old life. Together, they built something smaller than power and stronger than law. Not in the center of her clan fortress, not in his old lonely cabin, but on a stretch of hill between human fields and orc hunting ground, where both sides could see the smoke from their hearth. Edrin repaired roofs, tools, wagons, and winter fences for whoever came without hatred in hand. Thera rode patrol along the border and sat in councils with a new kind of authority, one shaped not only by strength but by mercy she no longer considered shameful. People still stared when they walked together. Some always would, but the staring changed nothing. The broken tusk medallion was reforged and hung above their door. Beneath it, on the first deep snow of winter, Thera stepped out into the cold and found Edrin stacking wood with his scarred hand, stiff from frost. She took the bundle from his arms before he could protest, and for a moment he laughed, the easy, unguarded laugh of a man who no longer felt like a guest in his own life. Once, he had carried a wounded orc girl through the snow because he could not bear to leave her to die. Now, as they stood together before the house they had paid for with exile, defiance, and love, she leaned her forehead to his and became the one place in the world where he was never small again.